Hello there. What we are soon to witness will have many in the West recoiling in horror, with Hamas and its supporters milking it for all it's worth. It looks set that Israel will send a massive military force into the Gaza Strip in the attempt to root out and destroy Hamas and all who support it. But as many informed commentators are saying, Hamas will have already planned this out and have put defences in place to achieve two aims. One, to defend every square inch they can, and two, to put as many of its own civilians in harm's way as they can, so as to paint the Israeli Defence Forces as the heartless killers. And on a global scale, people will let what the Hamas-backed terrorists did to ignite this fire fade into the past. Now, one of the civilised things we do in the West, especially in the UK, is when someone attacks you and you have no choice but to defend yourself, the victim must only use reasonable force to defend themselves. Any more than that leaves the victim open to prosecution. And this has percolated through into how we operate our own defences. Just enough to fend off the enemy, a pushback and limited action to maybe take out the opposing top brass, and even that draws the criticism of the woke literati. And there are those on the geopolitical stage who have a vested interest in forcing this moral position onto Israel. No matter what atrocities the Israelis have to endure, they must not retaliate other than to deal with each atrocity as it arises. And the likes of the UN will want to ensure this continues. They will do all they can to prevent Israel from going all in and eliminating the problem permanently, or at least for decades. That is why we must prepare ourselves for a concerted propaganda campaign generated by pro-Palestine and pro-Hamas activists here in the UK. Activists who have become emboldened by our weakness in dealing with those that openly support a proscribed organisation. And the peaceniks will be urging for the usual, we must put the guns down and get round the negotiating table. The trouble is, that has all been tried before, but one side is always clutching its AK-47s under that negotiating table. Here we have an intractable position, where one side wants to exist, but the other side wants their total annihilation, and there is no negotiating room in between. It is a binary choice. And right now I get the feeling that the Israelis have had enough of having to look over their shoulders every minute of every day, waiting for the next Hamas rocket to come over the Gaza border towards a school. But even with their powerful army, with reservists queuing up to join the attack on Gaza, some even coming from abroad, even with their modern tanks, fighter jets and helicopters, and all those drones, an attack on what is doubtless by now a heavily fortified area will be very expensive in both blood and treasure for the Israelis. Writing in the Mail, Colonel Richard Kemp, who was the CO of the 1st Battalion of the Royal Irish Regiment during the Iraq War, points to what awaits the Israelis. From snipers to endless mines and booby traps, where everything is a potential bomb, to the tunnels, the Gaza Metro as they call it, to the fortified positions, and of course, international opprobrium as the civilian body bags mount up. As far as the terror group is concerned, civilian Palestinians are nothing more than human sandbags to be sacrificed at will. The group's goal is not to defeat its enemy in traditional combat, but to ensure enough innocent Arab lives are taken over a sufficiently long time that the screams of protest from the international community become deafening, he writes. As I said a couple of days ago, this is getting very unpretty, very fast and on a very large scale. Now, the FT has talked to some of those Israelis preparing for this Gaza invasion, and they do know what's coming. A nightmare, except it's real, said one. And it says that the Israeli army will use its doctrine for victory to destroy as many pre-identified targets in rapid succession as it can. Something it appears to be conducting right now as its fighter jets take out target after target, all designed to keep Hamas firmly on the back foot, while importantly achieving as many of its military aims as it can before the international community mobilises to pressurise Israel into scaling its battlefield actions back. Now, an incursion into Gaza will of course cause widespread destruction and carnage, but also deplete Israel's defences as its many enemies that surround it watch and wait, including the Lebanese-based Hezbollah. Now, as I said, the West now believes in doing just enough to fend an enemy off, however temporary that fending off may be. And the diplomats will be out in force to try and stay the hand of Israel, other than in taking immediate and understandable defensive action. But writing for the Gatestone Institute, Daniel Greenfield says that to win a war, you have to fight a war. And that means fighting a war with all its collateral damage. As highly civilised people, we've lost touch with some basic concepts, like war, he says. And how about this? If your enemy is fighting a war and you're fighting something less than a war, the enemy will win. Police actions, nation-building exercises and the like have vague and poorly defined objectives, while wars have very clear ones. Wars are either won or lost, he writes. When you fight to stabilise a nation, you are not fighting a war. Wars are about destruction of your enemy. Fight to win, otherwise you fight to lose. But it is this all-out war concept that many in the West will, as I said, recoil from, because they believe that by letting a vicious enemy off lightly, it will always somehow end up in sweetness and light. That appeasement always saves the day. Or more likely, that if they can get you to stand back, they can then help your enemy to defeat you. Something I think that is more prevalent here. And as Colonel Kemp pointed out, a total war action would put Israel firmly in the sights of the global wokerati and the anti-Semites. But as pointed out by Greenfield in his Gatestone Institute piece, winning against Hamas will not be achieved by dropping a few bombs on Gaza and mopping up a few Hamas terrorists and then negotiating a peace. Winning means destroying Hamas, its leaders, its terrorists and its supporters by any means necessary, and securing the territory they operated from so that it cannot be used to stage similar attacks. A very tall order, and he says that Israel is capable of this. But the question is, will they do it?